Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you? Detective Mark Ellison squatted beside the corpse as morning mist clung to the pine woods around Pinewell Ridge. The sun hadn't yet broken through the trees, and dew sparkled off the exposed ribcage like tiny mirrors. The bones had been meticulously cleaned, arranged in a spiral pattern, vertebrae forming the outer rim. In the corpse's open mouth was a single vertebra, lodged perfectly upright. Mark swallowed. Same as the others. The forensics tech looked at him. "You okay, detective?" Mark nodded, though he wasn't. He remembered this pattern, not from training, not from case files, from childhood. Whispers of a name, the Bone Collector. At the Pinewell PD basement, the fluorescent lights flickered like they hated the cold. Mark flipped through yellowed folders and grainy photos. Harold Keswick, convicted in 1988. 12 victims, all found in the woods around Pinewell. The man had claimed he was taught by something older than the woods, then descended into catatonia shortly after sentencing. He hadn't spoken in 17 years. No mention of the vertebra in the mouth in the official reports. That detail had never left the room. Mark picked up a black and white photo. It showed Keswick during arrest. There was a strange symbol carved into his forearm, a spiral. Mark entered Black Hollow Psychiatric Prison under the weight of his badge. The nurse escorted him to a windowless room where Keswick sat in a wheelchair, thin as paper, eyes half shut. "Catatonic since '08, the nurse whispered. "No movement. Barely eats." As Mark stepped closer, Keswick's eyes snapped open. They didn't blink, just followed Mark's every movement with unnatural stillness. Mark cleared his throat. "I'm investigating copycat murders, spiral bones, vertebra in the mouth." Silence. Then Keswick smiled. The nurse gasped. He's never... Later in the hallway, she said quietly, "Sometimes, at night, he whispers things. Last week, he said, he walks again, over and over." The second body was found 6 days later. Same pose, same spiral. This time, scrawled on a tree nearby was a symbol in white chalk, a jagged spiral intersected by claw-like lines. Mark sent it to forensics. No results. An old hunter named Delvin approached Mark while he examined the scene. "You ever heard of the Bone Witch?" Mark turned. "Excuse me?" Before Keswick, the woods had stories about a woman, or maybe a thing, that lived out here. Taught how to read bones. Said to speak in spirals. "My granddad warned me never to step past Briar Creek at dusk." Mark stared at the spiral on the tree. It looked burned into the bark. Mark started dreaming strange things. A labyrinth made of bones, stretching forever. A boy with no face, standing in the center, whispering, "Father left me unfinished." Waking didn't help. His mind raced constantly. Details began to blur. He found himself redrawing the spiral symbol in his notebook without realizing it. His partner, Detective Reeves, brought him a photo. "You'll want to see this." From the '86 neighborhood survey, Keswick's old block. In the photo, beside the Keswick house, stood another family, 2 adults and a boy around 6. He had the same blank face as in Mark's dream. Reeves flipped the page. "Problem is, there's no record of that kid. No birth cert, no school files, not even a name." Mark visited the old Keswick property alone. The house had been abandoned since the arrest, boarded up and overgrown. Inside, dust danced in sunlight like ash. Everything was still. He moved through the rotting kitchen, then into the back shed. A dull hum vibrated under the wood panels. He pried open the floorboards. Beneath them were bones, small, child-sized. Some were etched, delicate lines scratched into the marrow like ritual markings. Mark touched one, and the air in the shed shifted, heavy and warm. A breath behind his neck. He spun. No one. The third victim had a name. Mia Cardenas, 27, jogger. Vanished near an abandoned church ruin. Mark followed the trail to the church, a collapsed stone husk half swallowed by ivy. Beneath it was a trap door. He descended. At the bottom, a bone altar, covered in symbols. Something moved in the shadows. A man stepped out, tall, pale, wearing a skin-tight mask of stretched leather. "I was waiting," the man said, voice soft. "He's proud of me, you know." Mark raised his gun. "Who are you?" "His son, the part that didn't die." The man tilted his head. "We were born in spiral. We shaped the silence. He carved me in dream." He lunged. Mark fired twice. The man crumbled, not with blood, but into dust and shards of brittle bone. No body was found. Just fine, gray dust, and a single vertebra left behind on the altar. Security footage of the church entrance showed only Mark entering. No other figure appeared on tape. Back at the station, Reeves looked at him, pale. "Are you sure about what you saw?" Mark said nothing. His hands trembled. That night, he dreamed of Keswick again, sitting on a throne made of rib cages, grinning. "He's not my son," Keswick whispered, voice echoing in impossible places. "He's what I left behind." In his apartment, Mark woke in sweat. On the wall above his desk was a drawing he didn't remember making. A perfect spiral, made of vertebrae, coiling into a blank face at the center. He stared at it for hours. The next morning, Reeves knocked on his door. Mark didn't answer. The apartment was empty. All they found was a sketchbook filled with spirals. One page had a single line. He didn't die in prison. He just learned how to leave something behind. Some nights, in the pine woods, hunters still claim they hear a low hum. Not quite a growl, not quite a wind. Sometimes they find a vertebra in the dirt. Sometimes the trees have chalk spirals on their trunks. And sometimes, if you're very quiet, you'll hear bones shifting. Not buried, but walking. The end. I wasn't planning to ride up front that night, but the inside of the cab was already packed, with my wife, her sister, and the 3 kids wedged together like fish in a tin, and I'd drawn the short straw. The cabman was an older fellow, wiry and weathered, with a face like crumpled leather and whiskers white as ash. London's street lamps threw flickering halos on his soaked coat as the horse clopped into the drizzle. There was something about the man, something observant and too still, like a crow watching a dying field. He didn't say much at first, but a gin at the Green Anchor loosened him up. "You're a talkative one," he muttered, licking tobacco-stained lips. "Most folk just stare at their boots." I smiled. "I like stories." He gave a strange laugh, dry, cracking. "Good," he said. "I've got one that'll keep you up." He began with what he called the dead fair. "It was nearly 30 years ago," he said, "but some rides never leave you." That night the streets had emptied early. He'd spent hours patrolling for a decent job, picking up nothing but scraps. Just past 1 o'clock in St. John's Wood, a woman hailed him from the mouth of a side street. "There were 2 of them," he said. "Ladies, proper looking. One young with a veil, the other, older, nervous. They were propping up a man in evening dress who could barely stand. They claimed he was the young woman's husband, drunk, newlywed, and in no shape to return to the house where they were staying. They didn't want scandal. Could the cabman discreetly take him home? One of them pressed a sovereign into my palm," he muttered. "Gave my hand a squeeze, so I agreed." The man was loaded into the cab, quiet, limp. The women vanished into the dark before the cab turned the corner. The ride to Clapham was quiet, too quiet. The man never moved, not a grunt, not a cough. The cabman told himself the man was just passed out. But when he reached number 47 Orange Grove, the real horror began. A servant answered the bell. "Who?" the man asked. "Mr. Hoffman, your master." "Our master's in India." They opened the cab door together. "The passenger," the cabman said, voice low. was slumped to the floor like a sack of wet laundry. He was dead, stone cold, no heartbeat, no breath, no signs of life at all. Later, during the inquest, tiny bruises were found on his neck, fingertip marks. Only a woman's hand could have made that pattern, the coroner said. And the women, gone. The name Hoffman, false. The address, random. There was no record of that man, said the cabbie, glancing sideways at me. No ID, nothing in his pockets. They'd scrubbed him clean. He paused. They used me to dispose of a body. The cab's wheels rolled on. The rain tapped the roof like a metronome of unease. I asked if he'd ever been a suspect. They ruled me out fast, but I never stopped seeing that dead man's face. Jaws slack, eyes half-lidded, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. Another pause. He looked over at me with an expression caught between pride and dread. Think that's strange? He asked. That's not even the darkest. He told me about another fare, a stiff old man in spectacles who hailed him daily from Vauxhall Bridge. The man carried a black leather bag, always locked, and insisted on slow, steady rides for exactly 3 hours. Doctor's orders, he claimed. Said the motion helped his nerves. The rides became routine, predictable, lucrative. But then one morning, when they reached their usual drop-off point, a constable was waiting. "John Malone," said the officer, "you're under arrest." The old man didn't flinch. He peeled off his wig and spectacles, revealing a much younger man. Inside the black bag, a miniature printing press, fresh counterfeit banknotes still drying. "He'd been forging money in the back of my cab," the driver muttered. "Turned my growler into a mobile mint." But those were just stories. He had dozens. There was the man with the hollowed-out lump of coal, the one who stared at it obsessively during a ride to the docks. "Looked ordinary," he said, "but it opened like a box." Weeks later, a steamer exploded in Bremenhaven. A coal torpedo, they called it. Dynamite hidden in the fuel. Insurance fraud. "I saw the devil's smile in that man's eyes," the cabman said, and for a moment I believed him. And then, when the road fell silent again, he leaned in. "But there's one fare I've never spoken about. Not at the station. Not even to my wife. Because if I did, if I really told it all, I'm not sure they'd ever let me out again." I said nothing. It started on a foggy night, the kind that softens the streetlights and makes your breath feel heavy. I was near the old cemetery in Kensal Green. A man in a long black coat flagged him down. He didn't speak, just pointed down the street. I asked him where to, and he held up 5 fingers, then made a slicing motion across his neck. The cabbie thought it was a joke, some drunk playing ghoul, but the man got in anyway. The ride was strange. Every turn the cabman made, the man behind him seemed to whisper to himself, muttered numbers, names. He never answered questions, never gave a destination. His reflection, the cabbie said, didn't match his movements. "What do you mean?" "I've got that glass slit up front. You can see your passengers if you want." But the man in the mirror would blink when the man in the seat didn't. Sometimes he'd smile, even when the real one wasn't moving. Eventually the man signaled to stop near the canal. He stepped out, looked at me, then reached into his coat and dropped something on the seat. It was an envelope. Inside, a single Polaroid photograph, sepia-toned, curled at the edges. The cabman held it up to the dashlight. It showed a horse-drawn cab parked in front of a funeral home. The cabbie inside was looking at the camera, his own face, but younger, 10 years younger. He turned to ask the man what it meant, but the man was gone, vanished, he whispered. Not around the corner, not into the dark, gone, like smoke. That was years ago. He kept the photo. Sometimes he swears the background changes. First a funeral home, then a cemetery, then a shallow grave. His younger self never moves, but the background does. "I think it's counting down," he said, voice hollow. "I think when the photo's blank, I'll be next." The cab creaked to a stop. We'd reached the palace. My wife tapped the window. The children were yelling for me to get down. I climbed off the box, still half caught in the cabman's world. He tipped his hat with a crooked grin. "Next time you need fresh air," he said, "you know where to find me. Number 94, Copper Street." I nodded and turned to the family. Behind me, the cab growled to life and disappeared into the mist. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabman's voice echoed in my ears. Before dawn, I searched the directory out of curiosity. There was no Copper Street. There never had been. And in the bottom of my coat pocket, crumpled and damp, was a Polaroid of a cab and a man sitting beside the driver. His face was mine. The smell hit him first, a mix of wet ash, scorched wood, and something else, something metallic. Detective Colin Mercer stepped carefully over the smoldering beams of what used to be a Victorian townhouse on Craymore Avenue. "Accelerant used," the fire marshal told him. "Professional job. Quick, hot, clean." But there was one survivor. Colin raised an eyebrow. "A person?" The marshal shook his head. "Not exactly. She led him into what remained of the study, the one room that had oddly resisted the inferno. There, resting on the stone hearth, was a partially burned journal, its leather cover charred black, but the pages inside somehow intact. The title, scorched into the front in warped lettering, read, "The Ledger." Inside, every line was handwritten, names, dates, locations, all in deep crimson ink. "It was lying open when we found it," she said. "We closed it to keep the pages from crumbling." Colin didn't respond. He was staring at one of the entries, freshly burned into his mind. William Adler, 03-11-902, throat cut, Ash Lane. "That name means something?" the marshal asked. Colin's voice was low. "He was my great-grandfather." Back at the station, Colin had the journal sealed in a secure evidence case, but something about it lingered. Curiosity won. After everyone cleared out for the night, he pulled on gloves and reopened it. The writing was immaculate, cursive, but elegant. And every name, every victim, had a cause of death listed. Gunshot, drowning, flaying, some as recent as last month. He stopped cold when he saw Ellen Fry, 07-14-2023, blunt trauma, 14B Reservoir Drive. That was just 2 weeks ago. Ellen had been found in a construction pit, her skull shattered, case still open. His phone buzzed. Forensics. The results on the ink were in. "It's human blood, AB negative, ultra rare, and it's consistent across entries. All of them." Colin stared at the page. He flipped to the back cover, where a few entries remained blank. But as he stared, the lines shimmered. New handwriting began to bleed through the page. One letter at a time. C. Mercer, pending, pending. He slammed it shut. Colin began combing through cold cases. Every name in the ledger matched an unsolved death. The handwriting spanned decades, yet never changed, not even the slant of the letters. Some entries dated back to the 1890s, but none older. He visited city archives and found a photo of the original townhouse, built in 1891, owned by a man named Walter Grieve, a bookbinder. The journal may have been made by his own hands. No one knew how it ended up in the fire. The current owner of the house had vanished without a trace 2 weeks before the arson. That night, Colin heard something in his apartment, a low scratching. He followed the sound to his locked file cabinet. Inside, sitting atop the files, was the journal. He hadn't brought it home. He opened it again, slowly. His name was still there, now with a date. 08-17-2025. Method: asphyxiation. That was 11 days from now. He ran tests. The ink matched only one blood profile. But the weird part? The DNA didn't map to any living human in the global registry. Not even close. More unsettling, a technician confessed that the journal had new entries that hadn't been there when she logged it the day before. But no one saw it being written. No pens, no devices, just red lettering, where none had been. The station's power cut out later that day. The next morning, the head custodian, a quiet man named Hugh, was found dead in the stairwell. Name: Hugh D. Masters, 0803-2025. Blunt trauma. Station C stairwell appeared in the journal at 4:13 a.m. Death pronounced at 4:19 a.m. Now Colin knew two things. The book predicted death. It caused it. Colin quit sleeping. He scanned his precinct's camera footage. At 2:45 a.m., in the evidence room, the journal opened itself. A single page turned. The letters began to form. Not written, birthed, like watching blood bloom underwater. He took it to a university occult specialist, someone eccentric, off record. The old man recoiled. Not cursed, he said. Worse. He pointed to a barely visible embossing inside the cover. A spiral with teeth. That's not a symbol. That's a glyph of feeding. The book is not recording deaths. It's harvesting them. Harvesting what? Colin asked. The man didn't answer. He just said, burn it. Drown it. Whatever you do, don't let it know you fear. Colin cross-referenced the ledger again. Something clicked. The names weren't random. They formed concentric circles around a central point, Craymore Avenue. He drove there, to the still charred ruins. Neighbors told him of past tenants who disappeared, always after hearing whispers or finding notes in red. He dug through police archives. A pattern emerged, and at the center, his father, an officer who died on duty in 1994, supposedly shot by a burglar. But the ledger entry read, Thomas Mercer, 12/8/1994. Fire, Craymore basement. There was no fire in the report, and no one ever mentioned a basement. That night, Colin returned to the ruins. Under the scorched floorboards, he found a hatch, rusted shut, but still intact. He broke it open. A staircase spiraled into cold earth. At the bottom, a room of stone, lined with hundreds of names etched into the walls. At the center, a pedestal, empty, but shaped perfectly to hold a book. The journal. Colin set it down. The walls hummed. Blood seeped through the cracks. And then, the journal opened itself. The pages flipped on their own. Faster, faster, past all the names, until it landed on a final page. Blank, until it wasn't. Colin Mercer, 08/04/2025. Unknown. Basement. He blinked. Today's date. Location. Right here. He turned to run, but the stairs were gone. The door above, sealed. He backed away. The walls began to bleed names again, old and new, until they covered every inch. His flashlight died. The journal slammed shut. In total darkness, he heard pages turning, then silence. The next morning, a neighbor reported smoke. No fire, but the smell of ash. When responders arrived, they found no basement, just earth and ruin. No Colin. But the journal was there, sitting open. Next name, Detective Lila Vaughn, 08/10/2025, bleeding, forensics lab. She's never seen the book, doesn't even know it exists, but it knows her.